The dailies. I'll start first of all by introducing the panel that we have here this morning, and I'll start with my extreme left where we have Professor Peter Kagwanja. Good morning and thank you for joining us. We also have Barack Muluka, who is the Secretary General for ANC. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, we have Professor Wajakoya, who is a lawyer. Thank you for joining us. And straight, let's dig into the dailies this morning, and we'll start with the Standard, where we have cornered Rotich to drop fuel tax. And gentlemen, I'm sure you have been abreast with what's been going on, but let me start with you, Professor Kagwanja. Does he have a choice than to postpone this particular pain? And again, when we look at it being if the president assents to the bill, the amendment to the bill, for it to be postponed for 2 years, are we merely just pushing a pain that we need to deal with now?
I think we need to deal with the question of fuel, because it's the fuel that determines whether the economy will grow or not grow. You need it for agriculture, you need it for all sectors of the economy. Therefore, basically having an agreeable policy on fuel is about talking about the economy that is a vibrant economy that is operational. So I think what is coming through is that the population of Kenya doesn't want this fuel, tax increase. Possibly, it may not be put off completely, but it must be reasonable. I think also the increase was meteoric, too high for the ordinary Kenyan. So I think either it should be done away with or you reduce it to reasonable.
But looking at the budget that was presented before, a parliament, do we have a choice as a country? And again, are we paying for our sins in terms of the borrowing that we have done so far?
I don't think it's the borrowing, because some of the borrowing is already paying for itself. I mean, take for example the SGR railway. Last year alone, we got 1 billion from ticketing. We've not even started talking about the cargo. So most of the borrowing is paying for itself. Thika Road, I mean, it was it has, look at it. It has paid for itself in terms of the traffic, the income that's coming from there. Look at the property market around the road, along the road. So it's not really the debt. I know somebody want to push that question of the debt burden. That's what is. No, it's not. It is how we balance the economy. Are we producing enough to be able to pay for our consumption, for example? That's okay. A big question.
Let me come to you, Barack Muluka. Do you agree that the infrastructure possibly is paying off, and with time, Kenyans should be able to realize a better economy? The SGR, of course, cost a whopping amount of money, which is supposed to be recovered over time. But looking at this, the CS for Treasury is trying to raise money to, basically fund the budget.
I do not have the statistics, Mike. I've not seen any credible and trustworthy statistics being released by these institutions, and therefore a lot of this would be in the terrain of conjecture for me. But the very indication that we want to impose a new fuel levy for 16% so that we are able to meet our international debt would indicate to me that there is a problem somewhere. That we have gotten ourselves into a situation where we hear that 50% of the revenue collection in the country today is going towards debt repayment. That would seem to suggest to me that the infrastructure is so far not paying for itself, because if it was, then we would not find it necessary to start this imposition. And I think what's happening here is that we find ourselves in a context where we want to actually raise revenue from virtually all sectors, and without saying so, we find the one entry point that is going to touch on everything, and so fuel is going to fuel revenue collection from virtually everything, because no sector is spared the moment you touch
on fuel.
Fuel.
And do you think the CS has a choice but to, according to the standard here, he is cornered? And of course, we already had some protests taking place. We've also had some manufacturers and people who deal with mainly fuel products saying that they will also go on strike because it is way too high.
The CS and the rest of us, together with him, are cast between the proverbial rock and the hard place. It's going to be fuel or something else. We have heard that if it is not the 16% levy on fuel, that he may have to review value-added tax virtually everywhere. Across the board, and which would push it, I'm told, to something like 18%, and which is the ruling percentage elsewhere in the East African community. That would still not be adequate. It might be able to fund just about 55% of the 79 billion that this is supposed to be covering, and therefore he would have to look for something else, maybe further borrowing. And you know that this problem emanates from borrowing. What we are not talking about is the IMF World Bank factor in this entire arrangement, because they have been the ones who have been pushing for this so that we are able to meet our international debt obligation.
All right, let me come to you, Professor Ajakoya. On the Daily Nation, it says, Spain at the pump, worse is yet to come. So even if we postpone this, it is likely to affect us. And we do know that one of the 4-point agenda that the Jubilee government has is to do with manufacturing. Fuel will definitely affect manufacturing negatively once this 16%, well, it has already been implemented, if it is not pulled out.
While I agree with what my colleagues have said, I'll take a different direction in answering you on this. The mess caused in the Ministry of Energy, the mess that has been caused in the Ministry of Energy and the oil sector, and I'm talking of oil and petroleum, where corruption has been the main thing, and where we've had deficits, where we've had Kenya Pipeline with this mess. That is one of the problems that has calibrated this increase. And unless we address that issue, where the billions have gone, then we should not be talking about the international tariffs on fuel, the conditionalities from the World Bank, the conditionalities from IMF, and the obligations of General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs in terms of oil and energy and gas. Therefore, the Minister for Energy, in particular, should be blamed for the increase, because of the mess that has been caused up in that ministry. And because we have not been told up to today, we have not been told what's going on as far as the corruption that has been increased, has been talked about in the energy sector. We are going to go around talking about the world, international nations and what have you, but that needs to be.
So what solution do you think the government then needs to implement to ensure that the manufacturing industry is not affected negatively, given that that's one of the 4 pillars that they have put forward as a way of Kenya getting out of, or rather, improving our economy?
First of all, this issue of the lifestyle audit should go to fuel style audit and corruption style audit, which should now be should graduate into the court style audit as it's happening now. We will not hear of lifestyle audit anymore. These people should actually be court style audit the way it's happening. Because even if we talk what, or even if we say what, or even if we talk about the 4 pillars, this particular issue is cancer which has to be addressed. And I'm sure, and I'm very glad that the president is not mixing his words seriously. And unless I see the Minister for Energy issuing a statement as to the deficits that have been caused, I don't want to speak about this.
All right, and maybe Professor Kagwanja, to come to you, and of course corruption has a role that it has played in all this, especially the cost of living, and this is because it's not that Kenya doesn't have enough revenue, but the fact that some of that revenue does not go into the right places. We've just talked about the IMF and some of the loans that Kenya has. And one of the things that bedevils us as a country is the fact that that money has come in, but possibly did not go into the right causes that it was supposed to.
I think the challenge of our economy, and by our economies I mean broadly African economies, is a question of efficiency. That's usually not there. You've designed a project, you start implementing it, and then there are too many things to negotiate rather than looking at the core intention of that particular project. And those are part of the leakages that we have in economies. The second, of course, is corruption, where money is siphoned to the wrong direction and therefore does not again do what it was supposed to do. And that is the justification for the current campaign against corruption. So that we start now harnessing these resources, not only to be able to pay debts, but also to produce so that the citizens can begin to enjoy the fruits of those investments. I don't think there is any country anywhere in the world that has emerged from situation A, which is poverty, to situation B, which is relative prosperity, without foreign debts. The Marshall Plan in Western Europe was all about bailing Western Europe from war to be like that. Today, America has over $17 trillion worth of debt. The 12% of it is public debt, and that public debt is owed largely to China, Japan, and I think Saudi Arabia. Now, so Africa is going to borrow where money is cheaper, is affordable for it. What I find strange is when now the IMF and the World Bank begin to micromanage economies. The other thing I find strange is when African leaders generally don't grow the economy in order to be able to pay the debt. You cannot pay the debt with the old economy. Yeah, if you have to borrow, you have to expand the economy to be able to pay. So we are expecting that for the SGR railway to pay itself, we need to have sufficient cargo. We need to encourage tourism so that Kenyans are moving up and down so that it can pay for itself. Otherwise, if you build it there, it's no different from a flower that you buy and put on your table in the house. It doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense.
All right, and Barak, coming to you. One of the things that we need to do as a country to ensure that we get out of this rat race is increase our production. We are more of consumers. We import more than we export. Yet we have the raw material. And I would imagine that the government's plan in building the manufacturing industries to ensure that we are able to produce more. But are we doing enough? Because even if this 16% VAT comes on fuel, as long as we are not manufacturing, as long as we're not exporting, as long as we're not selling to get the dollar come in, then we remain in a very dire strait.
A very broad question, Mike, and first allow me to agree with Professor Kagwanja here that we must talk about productivity. Which really plugs into the question that you are asking. We must know that this infrastructure that we are putting in place is going to play a very specific role towards the growth of the economy, be it in the movement of primary products or value-added products. If you look at the construction of the old railway line, for example, we are aware that the British constructed the railway from the Kenyan coast to Lake Victoria with some very clear objectives. And they wanted to reach what they called the headwaters of the River Nile because of the trading activities that were going on further up north within the Mediterranean Sea, Suez Canal area. And within a very short time, they also realized that the railway line must pay for itself. And therefore, you start seeing the land alienation in parts of central Kenya, parts of the Rift Valley, and you have this large-scale farming that then took place. Those of us who are growing up in this country in the 60s and earlier on will remember how the railway line was very busy all the time transporting farm animals, farm produce up and down and the like. And so you must have a very clear blueprint of what you want to do with that. Those are the kinds of conversations that we should be having in this country. Unfortunately, the conversations that we have, including the agenda that is set by the press, have been largely on who is going to team up with who to win which election. And that very minimalist agenda that does not help in development of the country. If we are talking about manufacturing, we must recognize that it's not the role of the government as such to build factories and industries, but to give us that enabling environment, and we should be having conversations that contribute to that thought, which is a good thought that the present government has, but which we must all then be enjoined into in the context of constructive conversations.
All right, Professor Wajakoya, what are the areas that we possibly need to concentrate on, especially in regards to ensuring that we manufacture, we export more than we import?
First of all, privatization is the key. The United States markets, which have become market-friendly, which are, the government, the U.S. has created market-friendly notions to privatization. And it timed the oil industry and energy industry to move it away from the government or government-related ventures into private entities, whereby the issue of competition was created and the introduction of tax rebates came in. And the state of Delaware, for example, became the first state in the U.S. to go ahead of other states to introduce, to give incentives to companies that wanted to invest with exempting them from taxes or giving them tax rebate. As Barack has righteously said, instead of us concentrating on what is viable for, to generate manufacturing industries and put it in the hands of private sectors, we are busy going into other agendas, teaming up with things that are very, very relevant, going into seeing as we used to see in the last 4 decades when the President Moi was in power, power-hungry manifestos whereby churches have now become part of corruption and sleaze, where they are not even asking for the source of revenue, and KRA failing to ask for those people who are putting in big money. I'm sorry to deviate. We should actually come in the regime of encouraging privatization in energy sector so that companies can come in and compete. We should also encourage privatization in the rail sector so that it's not only a government obligation with those that they have signed bilateral trade. We should encourage Gitonga to have a locomotive kind of cargo rail, or to have a company that can pay and utilize the rail so that it can open up trade that other people can come in. And we can talk of the rail coming in and the SGR paying for itself. But what about transporters who have been using the roads? Where do we leave them, for example? Are we just geared towards an issue of like having a venture which is going to pay for itself, whereas the other side of the economy is actually decaying?
All right, and we'll wait and see whether the president is going to assent to that particular bill to postpone the 16% VAT on fuel. But let's look at other stories in the papers. Page 4 of the Standard, we have, "You're free to audit my father's wealth." That's according to Raila. Barack, this again going back to the lifestyle audit, but we do know that politicians are well known for posturing and saying things that they don't mean. Is it even practical to audit their fathers and their grandfathers, as they have said? That is the president and Raila Odinga.
There is a sense, Mike, in which a basis for that kind of audit has already been done and laid. It's not such a difficult assignment for us, because we had the Bethuel Kiplagat-led TJRC, Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, and the report was made. Yes, it may have had blemishes here. It raised controversy quite a bit, and we have been told that it may even have been kind of adulterated by certain things being removed and so on. But even that which may have been removed would be sitting somewhere. People know where it is. So there is a basis for this. If people are making these kinds of pronouncements as just part of empty political posturing, they really must know that the basis is already there. And what is regrettable is that this report continues to gather dust in the National Assembly. But the basis is there.
Professor Kagwanja, Your thoughts on, that kind of posturing by politicians in regards to a lifestyle audit? It is a serious thing. And I believe that the intention of the lifestyle audit is to ensure that we root out corruption. But now...
I like the way former Prime Minister put it in public, which is mimi mweupe kama pamba, I'm as clean as cotton wool. And that's how every politician would like to project to be perceived. Now, the truth of the matter, and I don't know why Kenyans keep on splitting hair, corruption is a crime. We cannot keep on saying, how did you do the robbery with violence? If you are a thief, you are a thief. And why the anti-corruption, campaign is working now, and why Kenyans are beginning to have faith in in President Kenyatta's government in terms of fighting corruption, is because you are going for the real thing. These are the catwalking and so on. It's not. I know many people support EACC and so on. For me, corruption is crime. It's not about audit. First and foremost, just imagine how much money we use to do elections. How much money we spend on doing, like we're going to do census. Where is the infrastructure to do this audit? And who is going to be audited and who is going to be left out?
So do you think these are just political statements?
It is basically hot air. It's political hot air. Because first and foremost, we don't have the infrastructure. What is the architecture of auditing Professor Ajakoya?
Unless we are going to isolate certain individuals and target them perhaps for something more sinister than trying
but even if you do that, that's not your job. The job is the criminal investigation things. They're the ones who choose who to investigate and who not to. Therefore, if we just remove corruption from the docket of ethics and religious and faith-based matters, and moralities and all, and we put it to the side of the criminal, then we know we have jails, because our society is so well structured that we are just introducing some, woolly issues in order to conflate. To be honest with you, this kind of discussion, audit me, do audit this, is part of what is confusing us. Leave it clean and neat.
If it's criminal,
it's criminal. We're talking about public funds. Rotich, we are now fighting with Rotich over fuel. Rotich is trying to put money on the table for us to spend. But instead of it being spent on what Rotich wanted to spend for, it is put in Wajakoya's pocket or Kagwanja's pocket. Now, is that an ethical issue for me? Is it a moral issue? It's criminal. So why would I be audited? Don't audit me. Arrest me. Why would you want to audit me?
Do you agree that this is just political posturing?
Definitely. You find that the very, very people who are talking about this are the same people who are running to churches with millions and millions of shillings. And churches have also become a center of corruption. Some of these pastors should go to jail. Let them go and pray for me to die today. But let me tell them. Let me tell them.
God forbid.
Like now, today, you find leaders like
whoever they may be,
coming up and saying, we are going to make sure we fight corruption. But on Sunday, he's giving millions and millions of shillings. Where is KRA to look into the source of that money that they can pay?
But that's where now the audit comes in, because if you say it is giving millions of shillings, maybe he has a way he has gotten that money.
Let's move away from audit.
It's business.
Let's move away from this language of lifestyle audit. Kinoti has made it very clear. The DPP has made it very clear. Now the EACC is now following as if they have woken up from slumber. Take people to jail. The way it's happening. If the courts can be seized of the opportunity to do lifestyle audits when a crime has been committed,
and it's not because we have an absence of laws. There are enough laws that will have the criminals arrested and prosecuted.
And please, let's start with Raila and Ruto.
On what? Arresting them?
Yeah, let them go and explain to us some of these things, like what happened in the Mumia Sugar Company, what has happened in land grabbing. Let them be taken to court and let them explain from court. Not this issue of coming up and telling us, oh, I am as clean as Pampa, when things have gone wrong in this country. Let's follow the Philippine president's styles. We don't want this mediocrity of people coming up to tell who.
Okay, but if we took that avenue then, Professor Barak, do you think then we have any leaders that would be left? Or would we be having all our leaders basically going before a court of law?
I think we are fixated with this thought that leadership is restricted to a certain college of individuals that we know and who have projected themselves to us as leaders, while in truth there are very many leaders in this country, and those are the alternative leaders that we need to be looking up to. There remain very many questions that have not been answered. We know about the molasses plant in Kisumu. For example, how did it change hands? There are questions that have not been answered, and if you go to the TJRC report, you will find them there. There are questions about the Afya Center along Tomboya Street, how it was acquired by a certain family, a prominent one from Luo Nyanza. We need to have answers to that. We know about the question that he has raised about Mumias, which needs to be answered. We know about petrol and petroleum products importation in the country under the so-called Nusu Mkate government, which have not been answered. And many times people tend to mystify themselves and start projecting themselves as Mr. Clean. And because we have got a brevity of memory, we follow them and we worship them and we say, yes, Mr. Clean has spoken and is as clean as grade 1 cotton wool. No, that kind of posturing must end. And people like these ones who are telling us that they are ready for audits of themselves and families, we need to ask about something that happened in this country in the 1960s, which was called the Luo Thrift Company. And what the person who was called Rapenda did, and what that kind of wealth has done in Luo land, and ask ourselves about such things as Roadways Nyanza, where that kind of wealth came from, or Kilindinya, where it came from, Lodwe Bas, where it came from, and so many of these things. And people should not think that we do not have the institutional memory to take them to task.
But it looks like we don't, because they still are the leaders that we put back in place. Professor Kagwanja?
No, normally, we have to do a soul searching as a nation, and this is some of the issues we have with the TJRC. Do we want to dwell on the past, digging graves and looking for dirt and so on, for what our great-grandfathers did and our grandfathers did and so on? Or do we want to move on as a country? Where do we draw the line? Because there is something called moratorium. And nations really draw a moratorium. So this country needs to draw a line. And the line is from, let's say, 1900, that's what we are investigating. Or you move it up and say 2000, that's what we are investigating. Or you simply say we are investigating from 2017. And then we forget about it, because there comes a time when, for example, and that is the greatness. I met with one of the Ghanaian leaders way back in 2003, and he told me that you Kenyans are great people, you've done it again, because we decided not to deal with the regime that was there in the past ruthlessly, because we would have been preoccupied with dealing with that regime rather than rebuilding our economy, by not refocusing on that regime, in spite of the bitterness and anger that we had. Some had been maimed, some had been injured, Matibas and others were in hospital. We knew that as a nation, we knew. But we decided to deal with the future. And Kibaki focused on the economy. Kibaki focused on infrastructure. He focused on education for our children. Now, Uhuru is focusing on the 4 pillars. The question is, we need to draw a moratorium on this. And I'm sure Honorable Raila and others would want to help us to move to that level, where we draw a moratorium, where we don't keep on talking about historical injustices from whatever. History matters.
Moratorium is good, but I think moratorium also goes hand in glove with the reparations. That we must know that you are where you are and I am where I am because of certain historical happenings, some of them which stay in the docket of injustice. And therefore those who have unjustly enjoyed certain benefits and which have thrust them into certain relative advantage need to pay reparations.
And to be questioned. I'll ask you to hold that thought, because we need to take a short break and come back with political